verse 11. Ruth, chapter 4, verse 11. I was noticing one thing that may be disorienting to some people as I teach through the Bible, and over the years I do find little quirks here and there. I seem to break off in the middle of a thought or middle of a description or whatever. I try to go back. I don't always go paragraph to paragraph. I used to for a while. But we're all here together. You can get a tape if you miss something. This is the last lesson we'll have in Ruth. So all of these are go, but I find it tying this together at the end. You know, as I studied verses 18 through 22, I'm kind of going backwards. There's a lot more thought put into that you have to, and we're going to do some observations at the end that may be more enlightening than the whole study might have been. So just bear with me. Let's catch up to where we're at. Verse 7. We're going to go to verse 11, but I just want to show you where we're at. It says, "Now was the custom in the former times in Israel concerning the redemption and the exchange of land. To confirm any matter, a man removed his sandal and gave it to another, and this was the manner of attestation in Israel. So the closest relative said to Boaz, 'Buy it for yourself,' and he removed his sandal. But Boaz said to the elders and to all the people, 'You are witnesses today, and that I have brought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech, and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. Moreover, I have acquired Ruth the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, to be my wife, in order to raise up a name of the deceased of his parents, so that the name of the deceased may not be cut from his brothers or from the court of his birthplace. You are my witnesses today.'" Now, as we're going off of there, just remember what it does is solidify Jesus' birthplace as Bethlehem. Because remember, if we could relate back to the story when Joseph and Mary were called back for the census, Joseph had to go back to his birth town, which was Bethlehem. So it's kind of interesting. Here, and one of the things as I'm reading through Ruth was written, we don't know by whom, but to the people of that time reading it. But as I read this and reread this and deal with Ruth, it's more written to us today. It's not specifically says this is to you, but if you keep looking at this, how would they know? How would we tie in all these multiplicity of prophecies and things that have gone on in God's sovereignty? They had no clue the importance of Bethlehem. So we're in verse 11, and we're going to read 11 and 12 and deal with 11 and 12. And it's kind of interesting because this is where your Old Testament history must be very strong. It says, "And all the people who were in the court and the elders said, 'We are witnesses.' May the Lord..." Now, what I'm going to do is read through these two verses, but we're going to go back and go over the blessings. So you got to hear what these people say. So it says, or you can, as we go through it, I'll mark it. This is blessing number 1. "May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, both of whom built the house of Israel." So that's blessing number 1. Blessing number 2, and says, "And may you achieve wealth in Ephraim and become," Ephrathah, will be all right, "and become famous in Bethlehem." That's blessing number 2. "Moreover, may your house be like the house of Pharez and Tamar, whom Tamar bore to Judah, through the offspring which the Lord shall give you by this young woman." Now, I'll stop there for a moment and just that's blessing number 3. Verse 12 is blessing number 3. So there's 3 blessings attached to this. And very interesting, the blessings given. First of all, these blessings were given by whom? By the court. The people hearing this legal matter. But what's the first thing they said? What's the first thing out of their mouth? Huh? We are witnesses. Well, basically, what was said was, at the end of verse 11, verse 10, you got to really feel the flow of this. Boaz has made his speech to the elders and says, "You are witnesses," verse 9 today, "and I have brought you." And at the end he says, "You are witnesses today." And they answer back, "Witnesses." So that was a legal proceeding back then. "Are you witnesses?" And they all cry back, "We're witnesses, witnesses." So what they're basically saying is not we are witnesses, we've witnessed it. So by them saying this, they've signed. That's another way of saying it's a signed document. In other words, all the legalese behind this was solidified by them saying witnesses. That's where the speech and the legal proceedings ended. And the next thing you see is that they pronounce that they, by affirming that they're witnesses, they also give a blessing, which I find very interesting. Blessing number 1 says what? Just overall. Okay, Ruth will be fruitful. And we'll elaborate in a minute. Okay, we'll get there in a minute, but I wanted to, and we'll see how interesting that really is. What's the next one what's the next blessing they basically pronounce? That Boaz will be, how about this? Famous. We'll wrap it all up in a minute to see how, because it does say your name become famous in Bethlehem. What's the third one? That what? That the union will become faithful. A faithful union. Now, I'll explain that in a minute as we get to it, but it also helps to alliterate because it looks good. Now, that's just trying to get you in a nutshell what the blessings were, but in no way elaborates what was being said here. What's the first thing, when you read something like this, and Nicole alluded to it a little bit, what's the first thing you have to know a little bit about? From these three, you're looking at the 3 blessings. What you've got to grasp? History, Old Testament history. Otherwise, these little statements mean zero. Okay, let's go to blessing number 1. Let's talk about it a little bit. First of all, let's just observe a few things. It says, "May the Lord make your women, the woman who is coming into your house." Now, the word "coming into your house" just means the one you're marrying. Again, back then, the way it usually happened, you lived with your father, a guy did, and a guy would build onto his father's house. His wife would come on to that property. If they had children, they would build onto that property. So the sons really never leave. Dad drops dead, and they take over. So you can understand what's going on. Glad that's over. Could never get away from the wife could never get away from her mother-in-law. That's why, you think about it, why do you think Ruth is so attached to Naomi? They had that same situation. Elimelech had 2 sons. When they married, they built on to his house. When they all died, where was Ruth in proximity to Naomi? Right there on the property. Anyway, and the comparisons like Rachel and Leah. Anybody have a problem with that? Go ahead. Okay. Okay, your mind doesn't work as radically as mine does. Okay, she had more children. They were sisters. No, actually, Leah really didn't do it. You'll have a bigger problem in a minute. Wait. Okay, let's look at this. How many children did these both have together? No, they did not. She had 2, and I'm pretty sure Leah had 6. 6. Because they had handmaidens who had the other kids. See? Now I'm really giving you a problem. But the handmaidens' kids were considered her kids. The handmaidens' kids were considered her kids. Now, if that ain't enough to blow your mind, who was the first wife? Who's mentioned first? Why? Huh? Very good. And? No. Okay. Okay, let me explain to you how Jewish minds think. Rachel was the choice wife. Rachel was the promised wife. Rachel was the wife. Where did the blessing that comes out of this chapter come out of? Leah. This is the tribe of Judah. Judah's Leah's kid. Or Leah's stock. But, here's the kicker. When they say, may you be as blessed as these two, what they're saying is basically an idiom that's saying, you will be as fruitful as the entire nation, and the entire nation will look up to you. That's it. Their children became... Now let me tell you something else about Rachel, though. Rachel died near Bethlehem. So when you mark a town and say, well, we knew of Leah, but Rachel was close to us, so that's why she's mentioned first, with those reasons. Okay, but kind of interesting because when we go to the end of this chapter, the importance is on either one of them. The importance is on the idea that they had a nation. And through that nation, through a tribe in that nation, which is Judah, and through Judah would come the promised one. And somehow, our characters of this study fall right in the middle of that. So, next blessing says, may you achieve wealth in Ephrata. I'm going to be all right tonight. And become famous in Bethlehem. Now, it's kind of interesting. I want you to mark famous. We're going to talk about it in a minute. This is one of those, well, how do I want to do it? We'll look at it in a minute. Just mark famous. This is a blessing that comes before this book's over. This blessing will come out. This blessing, the first blessing, look at it. Ruth fruitful. Will Ruth be fruitful at the end of this book? She has her first child, but that's not considered fruit in Bethlehem. In anything that has to do with Judaism. Judaism, to consider fruitful, you have to have 7 sons. Okay? Now, we don't know. Yo. I can't even multiply what I got by 7 and get 7. So, but we look at this, and one thing he's called is wealthy and famous. Now, I don't know what the different versions say. I'm not looking at my Multiplicity Bible here. But what this points to is not his pocket wealth necessarily, but that whatever he touches will prosper. I prefer that more. I really do. Because he was already wealthy. Remember we talked about he's probably very well to do. He's this man of standing in his community. We're not looking at a guy that was looking for wealth or needed more wealth. I don't think the wealthiest. I don't think if he gave a couple $1 billion to Bill Gates, it would bother him to take it. But he doesn't need it. So Boaz doesn't need. And when somebody's giving you a blessing, they're not saying they bless you to be rich. They bless you, and the blessing has always been in Judaism. They love blessing people. They love telling them, may you live long and prosper. That kind of Star Trek idea, So they're not looking for you to necessarily be wealthy, but more of a healthy, famous, good standing, integrity, those kind of ideas behind it. Well, because it's the area they're in. Remember, it's Bethlehem, Ephrata, not the others too. There's a couple Bethlehems, just like there's a Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, right? And a Bethlehem, I think it points to the exact Bethlehem. Yeah, like we'd say Miami, Florida. Well, Florida's too big, huh? Miami in Dade County, maybe, or Homestead in Dade County. That may be a better picture. So, because if you say state, it's too big. In Homestead, yeah, that kind of an idea. That works for an analogy today. And Homestead and Dade County is pretty big. So. The other idea here is it's curious because later we're going to see where this. Well, let's go to the third blessing. I'm going to tie in the second blessing later, so I don't want to over elaborate on these anyway. It says the third blessing, and may your house be like the house of Perez, and some of them say Pharez. It's written in the NASB like this. Some versions may say it this way. I prefer this way. This way it makes him sound like a Hasidic Jew. It's Mr. Perez. the only reason I'm saying this is because this is the way it's pronounced, even though this is the way it's written in most places. So if you say Pharez and you say, no, that says Perez, it's Pharez. So I'm not trying to be finicky. I'm just trying to explain to you what it was. Now, here's the problem I have in this one. It says, may your house be like the house of Pharez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, through the offspring which the Lord your God will give you in this. Now, if you think about it, Judah was tricked into having a sexual liaison with Tamar, who was his daughter-in-law, and through that sexual liaison, they had twins. Pharez, I can't even spell it now. Pharez and Zerah. And they only pick out one of them to deal with. And the reason that is because through Pharez comes the line we're looking at. It's real interesting to track the lineage where these people break off. And one of the things I gave you last week is find out who Salmon is. I'm going to tell you how you can find that out in a minute. So for those of you that thought I was nuts and did research and found out I don't see what he sees nothing. But the only reason I think they're giving her a blessing is this, because they know biblical history real well. And Tamar's situation is similar, listen to what I'm saying, it's not the same, it's similar to that of Ruth. Ruth is a foreign woman, being taken on probably by an older man. She was somebody else's wife at some time. She was scorned upon. The similarities are there. Yet, her offspring is what God was counting on to carry on the Messianic lineage. Well, yeah, even though he was forced to carry out the Levirate law, very much so. She tricked him, which is horrible. But it was horrible for him to go checking out a prostitute anyway, figuring out his daughter-in-law. I mean, there's a whole lot of... Remember, the Bible gives you the truth. It doesn't say this is okay to do. At the same time, we're far removed from culture, so there's a lot of culture, even though it's speculative, we don't know what exactly happened. So there's a lot of... Now, it doesn't say culture's okay, therefore we can do it. But there are cultural ramifications that cause what happened, and God uses history for what He needs to do in this instance anyway. Exactly. And it's kind of interesting because if you drop down a few more verses in verse 18, Pharez is mentioned as one of the ancestors that will be in the lineage to this child. So even though they blessed him, it comes back in a minute to say, yes, they're similar to that because the lineage is there. There is the line of Pharez still coming down to that. It's kind of interesting because in the book of Numbers, just for history, if you go to the book of Numbers, not now, because I want to get done with this, and I got a lot of stuff in the end. But if you go to the book of Numbers, it's very interesting that when you talked about the tribe of Judah, it was the tribe of Pharez. Pharez was attached to the tribe of... So when they said the tribe of Pharez, it was also insinuated in the tribe of Judah. Pardon me? No. Because later, I think it's Numbers 26:20, if you guys want to check it out. It says something about Pharez being considered the tribe of Pharez, kind of thing. So, only because, again, what God does, it says, person B, you're going to have X amount of kids. Person A, you're going to have X amount of kids. But I've only got my plan through that kid. No matter how many kids they have. Remember, Isaac was the son of promise. But Abraham had other sons. Isaac himself had what? Jacob and Esau, two sons. There was only one son that was the son of promise, Jacob. Jacob had 12. They all counted. Even though one got erased and one got a double blessing, and the whole thing's going on there. It's interesting study at some point. Verse 13 starts a new paragraph. So Boaz took Ruth. It almost sounds caveman-like, but it's not. It doesn't mean that. And she became his wife. In other words, they consummated the marriage. And he went into her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. Now, there is a lot of when a director directs a movie and you said, I read the book and the book was nothing like the movie, we call that, what do you call it? Artistic license. Thank you. When people look at this verse, you should see the varieties of artistic license taken with this verse. First of all, the Lord enabled her to conceive. Was she barren? I can't prove that. But I can say she didn't have any children before. She might have been barren. But don't say she was. I will say this. I look at this verse saying God enables everything we have, every child we have. God is part of that relationship. And I will say this. When Boaz went into Ruth and he went into her, that night she conceived. That's my personal opinion. Within the sexual relations, that, what we would call that, what is it called? First time luck? Beginner's luck? She conceived. The reason I say that is because the language gives it that God wasted no time to fulfill the verses before it. She was blessed, Boaz was blessed, and God said, the moment this relationship is consummated, I will bless it. So, we want to call it divine timing, whatever you want to call it, God's hand upon it. But there's some people, it basically said that this is like the virgin birth. I read one commentary that said she was so barren that God actually helped her conceive. And I'm sitting there saying, this is ludicrous. Let's not read into things and make it. Look at what it says and just say that God's hand was on this. God wanted to see her blessed. And look what happens. Not only is verse 11 and 12 blessings, verse 14 says, Then the woman said to Naomi, Blessed is the Lord, who has not left you without a redeemer today, and may his name become famous in Israel. Now this has what we call a double-ended prophecy. The immediate reference is to Boaz. Boaz fulfilled his rights as redeemer of the family and Levirate law. But, listen to the language. Blessed is the Lord who has not left you without a redeemer today, and may his name become famous in Israel. And what he's saying is, through this son, through this child, your name will become famous. Now, how many people would know anything about Boaz and Ruth if it wasn't for that, the messianic seed that came out of that? We wouldn't have any reason to know anything about Ruth and Booz, if you guys remember that. And I don't want to take a whole lot of license, but I want to read through verse 16. And I just want to show you, it's kind of interesting that I wrote some notes here on this. And it says, May he also be to you restorer of life and a sustainer of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons has given birth to him. Then Naomi took the child and laid him in her lap and became his nurse. Now we'll have to do some work for verse 16. Of course, it's bad, real bad. But verse 15, basically what we're looking at, what did she say? What did I just say? The most important thing for a woman to be considered fruitful is to have how many sons? 7 sons. And what the first comment is, Ruth is better to you than 7 sons. And what the people are recognizing is that Ruth, who shined throughout this book in her love towards Naomi, was better than 7 sons. To us it sounds like what a hollow statement, if anything. But to me, that's a supreme tribute. Something that would have marked the tombstone, possibly. Ruth better than 7 sons, and you say, huh? But what it's saying is, Ruth and Boaz, by this union that they had, and the child that she was now carrying, produced the perfect family. I cannot find anything that is, because, turn with me to 1 Samuel chapter 2. 1 Samuel chapter 2. Let me get you some language involved in this. 1 Samuel chapter 2. First Samuel chapter 2. I think this is the one I'm looking for. Verse 5. 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 5. And this is Hannah's prayer. And remember, Hannah was barren, and she had Solomon. Solomon. Verse 5 says, Those who were full hire themselves out for bread, but those who are hungry cease to hunger. Even the barren gives birth to 7, but she who has many children languishes. And basically what she's saying is the perfect family was considered the number 7. What's the number 7? We all know it's the number of perfection. So the Bible has... pardon me? Yeah, I'm not into... Please understand this. I'm not into biblical numerology and all that stuff. But there are certain numbers that God uses abundantly for certain things. 40. So when you hit your 40th birthday, I don't think it's something bad. It's just that period's gone. Next 40. Because God uses 40 a lot. If you don't believe me, look up 40 one time. 7's another one. 3 is a phenomenal one. So anyway, we're not getting into the numbers. But what I'm saying is this brought Ruth... This statement was better than giving Ruth the highest praise. This statement was there. Verse 17. Actually, verse 16. Let me give you a better understanding of this. What does it look like to you in verse 16? Doesn't it look like that Naomi took the child, laid him on his lap, took out her boob, and fed this child? What did you say? Go ahead, seriously. Oh, I like that. Much better. Mine says, became his nurse. And many said, well, and they go into the ability for older women to lactate and all that. I'm sitting there saying, people, the language says this. The language says this. Naomi picked up the child, cared for the child, and put her in her lap, and attended to him. What does that mean? Naomi was grandma. Verse 16 says Naomi was grandma. No, I think, it's kind of hard. This is an opinion. Okay, this is where we're going to get it. My opinion is that Naomi understood the reality of who this child was. I'll tell you why. It's a play on words. So we'll see in a minute. But stick with me for a minute. But I really feel she knew that the Messiah was coming through this child. Remember, at the beginning, Naomi's a woman of God because she's following her husband. In other words, there's no point that I can say she's biblically wrong other than one point where she's bitter from what everything's happened, but she's going back to a place she can get better. She's going back to Bethlehem. She's getting out of Moab. So I really feel Naomi had wonderful godly understanding, but at the point she was following her husband. And sometimes following your husband, even though it's the right and godly thing to do, doesn't necessarily help you to grow where you're at. Verse 17, because verse 17 and 16 are still part of the same thing. It says, the neighbor woman gave him a name, saying, now this is, I find, the most interesting thing. Who named this child? It's like somebody seeing my dog and saying, you should have called that dog, something else. And I'd say, that's my dog. You ain't naming my... Now, this is my child. And who's giving this child a name? A neighbor woman gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to who? Which fulfills the whole idea of redemption. And we've gone into that enough. I'm not going to beat it to death. And they named him Obed. Now, pardon me? Obed means servant. Turn with me to Isaiah 52. Exactly where I'm going. Which is very interesting because I was studying something on Acts that had to do with what Jesus is called in Acts, chapter 3, I think. And I was studying Isaiah 52, and I went to Ruth the other day when I was getting prepared for this to finish off. And I said, you know something? Here's where I'm in Acts, talking about Jesus being the servant, and here I am, Obed's called the servant, and where did both of them bring me? Isaiah 52. Isaiah 52, and we can begin in verse 13. Behold, my servant will prosper. He will be high and lifted up and greatly exalted. Just as many were astonished at you, my people, so his appearance was marred more than any man. Who are we speaking of so far? Christ. And his form more than any of more than the sons of man. Thus, he will sprinkle many nations. Kings will shut their mouths on account of him. For what he had been told them they will see, and what they had not heard they will understand. Who has believed our message? To whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of parched ground. He has no stately form or majesty, that we should look upon him, nor appearance that we should be attracted to him. And it's talking about a servant. This whole idea, and this goes all the way to where it goes on. You can even look down to verse 11. As a result of the anguish of his soul, he will see it and be satisfied. But his knowledge, the righteous one, my servant, will justify the many, as he will bear their iniquities. And Jesus is referred to many times as the servant king. Thank you. That's all right. This too shall pass. We got to get a belt on that kid. Verse 18. Ruth chapter 4, verse 18. 3 teens, and none of them are awake and aware. Stephanie's going to go tell them all. Verse 17, it says, he is the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now, Boaz, Ruth, connection. They had Obed. Obed had who? Oh, go back to Ruth. Ruth chapter 4, verse 11. Jesse, not James. Oops. And Jesse had... Well, we got some interesting things. We can make some interesting observations. I'm going to read the end of this, and we're going to go back. It says, verse 18 says, now these are the generations of who? Perez. Not Judah. We dropped down one generation because the tribes were known as the tribes of Pharez, because it wasn't through his brother, it was through Pharez, and Pharez was the firstborn. They put a red ribbon on his, you can read it in Genesis 38, but I'm not going to get into that. To Pharez was born Hezron. To Hezron was born Ram. To Ram, Amminadab. To Amminadab was born Nahshon. To Nahshon, Salmon. To Salmon was born Boaz. To Boaz, Obed. And to Obed was born Jesse. And to Jesse, David. And this has got to be the queerest ending of any book. It stops dead. Now we know the end of the story, but it stops dead at David. There's a period there. And I'm sitting there saying there's no sign off. It's like a dead stop. Now, go ahead. Oh, I agree with you. I really do. Oh, no. I definitely agree. Even though the time of Ruth was somewhere in Judges chapter 6, the writing was after David. Well, that's a good observation. Hang on to that. Observation, and we're going to make some observations. First of all, and I want to sort of drop the ball right here in the middle. Who is Nahshon? Now, the other ones really don't matter. And I'll tell you why in a minute. You'll see why. Well, who is Nahshon? Okay. Go to 1 Chronicles chapter 2. Very good. Like, go, girl. First Chronicles. Now, this is, everybody says those are the books I don't read. This is why you need to read these books. 1 Chronicles chapter 2. We'll find it. We're reading verse 10. Actually, we start in verse 9. 1 Chronicles is before 2 Chronicles and after 2 Kings. Those are the pages that are still stuck together and very clean. For those of the ones that say Joseph begot this guy begot this guy with a longer name, and that guy with a long name begot this guy that's I don't know why they don't just call these guys Bildad and Jim and all that stuff. So verse 9 says, now the sons of Hezron were born to him were, here we go, Jerahmeel, Ram, who counts, and Chelub-Balai. Now Ram, Caleb sounds good. That's who Caleb is. That's the same name for Caleb. So, I like that better. It says, and Ram became the father of Amminadab, and Amminadab became the father of Nahshon. Now, this is who Nahshon is. He's the leader of the sons of Judah. So, the sons of Judah, when they were leaving Israel, let's use this spot here. Moses and his band of ingrates, about 2 million Jews, were leaving Israel. And when they sent in Numbers 13, they sent in the leaders of the 12 tribes of Israel to spy out the land. Nashon was the leader of the tribe of Judah at that time. You with me so far? Because this gets very interesting. So Nashon was pre-king king. Because, hold your place here. No, you leave. No, hold your place in First Chronicles. Go, what? We're going to go. I'm going to straighten you out. What? Okay, no. Pharez was Judah's son, who the tribe was then called, instead of the tribe of Judah, it's called the tribe of Pharez, because it says here Pharez had, where to go? The sons of, well, we can go up further for Pharez. 2:5. It says Tamar, his daughter-in-law, bore him Pharez and Zerah. Judah had 5 sons in all, but the only son that counted was, for the lineage we're dealing with, is Pharez. Okay, for the lineage we're dealing with, they all count. Because one of the sons, well, from that line came Caleb. Remember Caleb? Okay, now, Caleb's not part of this. Genesis 49:10. Genesis 49:10. I got to show you how important this is, because if you don't understand this, it's gonna blow your loops why he ended with David. That went into the first set of spies they sent into Numbers 13, and the spies came back, and 2 of them said, "Beautiful place, let's go," and the other 10 said, "Oh, no. He was one of the no votes." Okay? But Genesis 49:10, when Jacob was blessing his sons, he gave this blessing to Judah. He says, "The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet until Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples." So Judah was going to be the ruling class of people. So Nashon was pre-king. In other words, there wasn't kings yet, but he was the ruler, and according to 1 Chronicles chapter, which we need to go back, because I'm not done with 1 Chronicles chapter 2. Even though Moses was leading the people, this is the kingly line that the blessing had already been on, so he was the leader of the sons of Judah. So when you talk about the tribes of Judah, he was king of Judah, for lack of a better word. He wasn't king. He wasn't king over all the people, but he had the rulership over the tribe of Judah. If he was the rulership over the tribe of Judah, God had blessed this to be the kingly line. He wasn't king, because there was no kings yet. But God had so controlled it that this was still a leader among men. Bear with me, because this gets interesting. Go back to 1 Chronicles chapter 2. And it says, Nashon became the father of who? Okay. Now it says Salma. This name is written about 20 different ways. Salmon is a goofy name. Salma sounds like a girl. So we're going to do it with Salmon. Now, if Nashon was the ruler king, and this is a kingly line, and he died in the wilderness. Remember what happened? The wilderness, this is why you got to know biblical history, because when you read this, you won't get it. This is how I got it. And if you want to argue with me, I don't know where you're going to poke a loophole through. He died in the wilderness. Then in Joshua chapter 2, they sent in more spies. Who would go? Why do we know that? Is it written anywhere? No, but it's logic, right? Because this generation died off, he now takes the place as what? Leader of the tribe of Judah. Go with me to Joshua chapter 2. This is why you couldn't find it. I love you. Joshua chapter 2. Now, this and a little logic and a little guesswork. It says, Joshua chapter 2 says, Then Joshua, son of Nun, sent 2 men as spies secretly to Shittim. I said that real quietly. Shittim. Saying, go view the land, especially Jericho. So they went and came into the house of the harlot Rahab and lodged there. Who was Salmon's wife? Rahab. Where did they meet? He was a spy. The spy met the harlot. And there we got another love story. And that is Boaz's mom and dad. And you understand through the back end now how easy it was for him to love Ruth. Because her name started with an R. No, just kidding. Not for sure. Not for sure. Not for sure. But I will die going to go to my grave. Rahab is meant as the wife of Solomon. But Jewish tradition also has, if you go to some rabbis, they believe that this is where his wife, how he got his wife, he is one of the spies. Now, can I write it dogmatic as the gospel? No, I can't. But I'm going to say something. If the shoe fits, wear it. I can't I put the pieces together for you guys. I promised you I would. You see what I'm saying? Right. Right. And Caleb. Joshua didn't go. Do you think Caleb would have gone? Okay, so that just left out those 2 tribes. Yeah. The people. Because he's leading the tribe of Judah, which is the chief tribe. I guarantee you he went. No, because there's no king in Israel yet. Moses is leading. Actually, Joshua's leading the people. Because right now they got a general. Then they're going to fall into a period where they're going to have judges. And then they're going to have a place where they're going to have a king. Command. King to come. Okay, go back to Ruth so I can finish this because I've got a little secret. Oh, wait, I'm not done. It's amazing what you can find out in the begats and the begots. Let me tell you, it really is. What, do I have smoke coming out of your ears or something? Ruth, the end of the book. Now, verse 21 says, Salmon was born Boaz, and to Boaz, Obed, and to Obed was born Jesse, and to Jesse, David. And you say, end of the story. End of the story. I think not. Because I think when God had this book written in His mind, it is not the end of the story. It leaves you wanting more, doesn't it? Don't you feel like, where's the end of the story? Where did this lead us? Okay, wonderful romance. David, oh yeah, and I agree with you. All the people realize this is David's lineage, this is it. But people weren't looking for David, they were looking for Messiah ben David. Turn with me to Matthew. Yeah. Matthew chapter 1, verse 1 is the continuation of Ruth. Since we're still in the Old Testament anyway. It says the book of the genealogy of Yeshua HaMashiach, the son of who? Wow. And where did Ruth just leave us? With David. Who's David's son? The Messiah. And then you can read through the generations because then it says, the son of Abraham to pick up where the lineage of the people of God to set up the king goes. And then it goes all through all the kings. You can see that. And basically, and I really feel beyond a shadow of doubt. And notice that the only thing in this book that mentions a person's title, look at verse 6. To Jesse is born David, just like it said in Ruth. Now what did it add? What? What? The king. No, it's the king. Specific. When the people said, who's the king? They said David. But they all knew where David's tomb was. We see in Peter. see in Peter's first sermon in Acts. They all knew where the tomb was, but they were looking for someone to fulfill the king that would live forever. Go to 2 Samuel chapter 7, not now, but that's where the Davidic covenant is. I want to read this in the end, just to get you thinking about certain things. I'm taking this out of a commentary on Judges and Ruth by Leon Morris. Since we left off in the Gospel of Matthew, it says the Christian will what happens. So Ruth only could see what happened in Ruth's lifetime, and we got the greatest thing in the Word of God that sees an overall of what's happened. So, but in my lifetime, there's only certain things I'm going to see. And we see many people who look forward to things that were not in their lifetime. Go to the book of Hebrews. It goes on to say, a genealogy is a striking way of bringing before us the continuity, I'll be all right, of God's purpose through the ages. The process of history is not haphazard. There is a purpose in it all, and the purpose is the purpose of God. And I looked at that and I said, you know something? I can't sum it up any better than saying that God is a God in history that makes sure it all works out for His purpose. So when we look at history, it's just not studying something old. It's something God's using for His purpose. I told you all, I think it was like the middle of this year, I started reading for my devotional kind of reading, Christ in the Camp, which was a Civil War, basically how every soldier from both sides, mostly the South, served the Lord within the midst of war, and the prayers that went up, and the meetings that they had, and all that stuff in the war. And you say, what was the purpose of us having a Civil War? And history shows that it gave us what we call the Bible Belt kind of thing. And I'm not going into that kind of history stuff. But as we see in conclusion in the book of Ruth, that even though it's a wonderful romance and a wonderful story, that it's not about those three main characters. It's not about Naomi. It's not about Ruth. It's really not about Boaz. It's about God's working in history through three people that basically, yes, were they something special in their time? Yeah, we could say that. Very special. And the blessing, let's go back to Ruth real quick. And let's go back, what I wanted to do at the end of this, the last 2 minutes, is tie up. Remember there were three blessings we started with. Blessing number one, blessing number one is, may the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, both of whom built the house of Israel. Did Ruth at the end, as we look back in history, not build Israel better? Because through her seed came the Messiah. Through this marriage. Secondly, it says that may you achieve wealth in Ephrathah and become famous in Bethlehem. And we see right down here at the bottom that they received it right then immediately, because it says in verse 14, it says, then the woman said to Naomi, blessed is the Lord who has not left you without a redeemer. May His name become famous in Israel. So not only was Boaz and Ruth supposed to become famous, but it was really meant for his name, Obed, the servant, who later, what's in everybody's mouth? Do you realize how many times Jesus Christ is said in a day? Think about that. Yes is taken in vain. Yes is a curse word. Yes is in conversation's sake. Yes in sermons, whatever. But His name is mentioned more than anybody. Nobody ever says, Buddha. You did. You just. Yeah. No, but nobody ever says, oh, Allah be, whatever. But Jesus Christ comes out of everybody's mouth. And so thirdly, it says, may your house be like the house of Pharez, whom Tamar bore to Judah through the offspring of the Lord, and shall be give you by this young woman. So basically, his house will thrive forever, because Jesus Christ died, buried, rose again, seated at the right hand of the Father in human form to live forever. So what kind of, to have that kind of lineage, it's not in my loins. So those blessings have come to fruition. So, any questions? I close the book. Okay. Because it's going to look really bad on the tape if we do 15 questions and answers and everybody's in blank spots.